So unfortunately, we have not only a large amount of raw footage in terms of distinctive cluster munition impacts in Kharkiv in particular, but also significant numbers of recovered parts of multiple long-range rocket system cluster munition warheads. So there's absolutely concrete evidence that the Russian forces are firing cluster warhead equipped rocket artillery into cities at this point. So for a start, the use of cluster munitions in built up areas is against a number of international treaties, although of course Russia has not signed up to those, so along with the United States. Although it is generally considered to be against the laws of war because it is impossible to be discriminate or proportionate with a cluster munition. And so you end up with these scattered, unexploded munitions all over cities, which of course people then either accidentally sort of step on or disturb. Children often pick them up. And so we saw a lot of injuries from this sort of thing in Aleppo and Homs in Syria, where again, the Syrian Air Force and the Russian Air Force were also using cluster munitions. And wherever cluster munitions have been used in the past by lots of different militaries, before the various ban treaties, they were used extensively. There is not only an initial indiscriminate impact with the explosives on civilians, but it presents this long-term threat to life and limb by the fact that there are all these unexploded bombs in effect left everywhere. So it's certainly evidence that the Russians are loosening up their rules of engagement in terms of how much firepower their forces and how much particularly indiscriminate firepower their forces are allowed to use in urban areas. Clearly, the Russian forces were sent into Ukraine with the expectation that this would be quick, that their infiltrated special forces and operatives would be able to decapitate the Ukrainian government, both at the national and the local level, and therefore the troops could kind of be brought in without having to fight their way into the cities. The Russian military, and indeed any military, will struggle hugely to fight in a defended urban area, as the US, for example, found out in Fallujah, the Iraqi army in Mosul. But the Russian army relies very heavily on indirect fire, so artillery in particular, and also when the Air Force gets involved on a lot of unguided weaponry. And it's basically a very old-fashioned, very indiscriminate sort of siege warfare tactic of trying to make it so unlivable for the civilian population within an urban area that they leave. Or basically driven underground at the very least. And that matters because it's much easier for a defending force to kind of blend into the background of a city if the population is still there. And it's massively harder for a force that is trying to take an urban area to hold it. Cluster munitions in a defended area are a not terribly militarily effective, but extremely terrifying and oppressive weapon. So they are designed to, their use suggests the Russians are trying to break morale, inflict terror on the civilian population and the defenders, in order to try and force a negotiation or just retreat in concession. While the initial Russian operation has been much less capable and coherent than we expected and feared, and the Ukrainian resistance has been magnificent, it's far too early to read into that the Russians are somehow, a kind of paper tiger. The fact that they've been fighting in an almost inconceivably mal-coordinated way means we haven't seen a lot of the firepower that they can and now almost certainly will bring to bear. It's going to get really quite grim, and hopefully Ukraine can continue defending. But militarily, the odds of Ukraine defeating this Russian invasion, if it continues on, they switch onto kind of full bore mode, as it were, are pretty poor.